like nobody was there? Have you ever felt forgotten in the middle of nowhere? Have you ever felt like you could disappear? Like you could fall and no one would hear? Have you ever felt like nobody was there? Have you ever felt forgotten in the middle of nowhere? Have you ever felt like you could disappear? Like you could fall and no one would hear? I love San Francisco. I never pass up the opportunity to recognize the blessing that it is, the privilege that it is to live in this city right here in the Inner Richmond district, just a few blocks from here. And I'll tell you, God must have dropped that house on Zillow for us that day, because days before we were supposed to move to San Francisco, the listing appeared when we didn't think we would have a place to land when we got here. It's a typical San Francisco home layout, 3 bedrooms on the top floor, 2 of those bedrooms side by side, connected in the back by a lovely little sunroom, overlooking our small, shared, because we rent, urban backyard in a grid of backyards that line up with ours. I'm sure you've all seen that before. I really learned about this concept of a sunroom when I moved here, this room with no closets, only windows, and in this case, 2 of the doors leading into what are now my daughter's bedrooms. Most of you probably are familiar with this room. It's my Zoom room. It used to be David's office before I took it over during the pandemic. It is my sanctuary. It's the room that has all of my sidurim, my chumash, my desk chair, which I still don't love, the piles of notes from Monday morning classes, and my laptop sits right on top of a standing desk, which was a later addition when I realized how much davening was going to happen in that room. Please rise, please be seated. At the beginning of the pandemic, I set it up as temporary because, God willing, I wouldn't be there for long. And then it became more evident that this was going to be much more permanent of a space for me than I was hoping for. So I started to settle in. And while that room is an extension of a sometimes very chaotic household, I have to admit that when I walk through Riva's bedroom and into the back room and close the door, it's as if I'm home and completely alone. And sometimes I feel even more connected to those of you who are on the screen than the people who are downstairs in my living room or in the kitchen dancing along to Kabbalat Shabbat. What is that? What is that feeling of disconnectedness? I want to be transparent. This is not a sermon about loneliness. Separation, maybe, disconnectedness. I can sit and pray in that office by myself or on a screen, feeling disconnected from what is happening right outside of the room that I'm sitting in. And yet, I don't feel lonely. Have you ever felt like nobody was there? Have you ever felt forgotten in the middle of nowhere? What is that feeling like? Just before sundown on Erev Rosh Hashanah in 2019, 2 full years ago, my younger and only brother proposed to his beshert, his soulmate. Soon after their engagement, they set a date, November of 2020. And as we got closer, things started to feel a bit uncertain. Here at CBS, the summer of 2020, we were already planning for a fully virtual High Holy Days season. High Holy Days completely online. My family, though, still a few months out, feeling optimistic, we felt hopeful. And then I found out that I was pregnant with our second child. Obviously, this news was exciting, but it also brought the advice from my doctor that I was a high risk and I wasn't allowed to fly. And so, as their wedding plans continued to evolve and my belly grew with every month and week of baby's development, it was clear that we would be watching my brother's wedding from our living room. Riva was supposed to be a flower girl, and I was supposed to be a sister at my brother's wedding. And so, in a moment of feeling helpless, separated, disconnected, maybe just trying to add a little levity to an otherwise unfortunate situation, I printed big photos of ourselves. One of me, and one of David, and one of Riva, and I shipped them to Philadelphia. And so now, there's a family photo of my mom holding a stick with a picture of Riva's head on it, and my brother holding a stick with a picture of David's face, and my mom holding mine. And it's a little bit funny, right? But it's also very, very sad. I had to ship myself to a family wedding. I had to watch my brother and his bride walk down the aisle through a TV screen. I felt alone, like I should have been there, like we all should have been there. But as I sat and I watched with David and Riva, again, I felt a loss, but I didn't feel lonely. Well, let that lonely feeling wash away. Maybe there's a reason to believe you'll be okay. 'Cause when you don't feel strong enough to stand, you can reach out your hand. Every year, we return to the reading of the Kohen Gadol that we spoke about this morning in the Torah service, the high priest who once a year on Yom Kippur would enter into the holiest place in the world to pray, the Kodesh Kodashim, the Holy of Holies. And in order to get to the Holy of Holies, the high priest had to pass through two other spaces to get there. First, through a gate and a courtyard, and next he would come to the tabernacle, which had two spaces. One where the priests could go, only the priests, which held the menorah. And then if you continued on, a hidden space behind a curtain was a small windowless space, the Holy of Holies, where only the high priest could go. He would burn the incense and sprinkle the sacrificial blood as an offering to God. And in that small space alone, he would pray for the forgiveness of his sins and the sins of the Jewish people. And if he was worthy of forgiveness, it would enable forgiveness of the entire Jewish people. But if he was not worthy, he would risk his own death. In light of the world that we have experienced over these past years, and how far our practices around prayer have shifted since the time of the temple, when I read this ritual this year, I read it with a lot of anger, confusion. Why would they send him in there alone? There were instances when the priest didn't even emerge alive. Didn't they know what happens when people go in to pray by themselves? Asham knew, but God knew. We pray as we don't pray as I. In fact, when the first human was created, the next thing that God did was he created a partner for Adam. He said, Lo tov heyot Adam levado. It is not good for a person to be alone. And yet, this was our tradition. To watch the high priest move deeper and deeper into the temple, farther and farther away from the Jewish community, in order to be consumed by his own thoughts and his own prayers. But maybe, just maybe, we could believe that in fact he was not actually alone, that maybe in order to be the Kohen Gadol, he had to move into this place physically, farthest away from the individuals in his community who he cared about, but in spirit, in his heart, he brought his community with him. That he was living out his purest purpose by trusting his faith in God and trusting his faith in the Jewish community. And that while he was there physically alone, he held the experiences and the hopes and the dreams of the entire community, and he prayed for forgiveness on their behalf, that they too would be able to realize those dreams As he did that holy act, it was as if each of them was in the room with him. And we also know from the Talmud and its explanations that on the outside of the tabernacle, the community was standing there waiting for him. In fact, we are told that the high priest shortened his prayers so that they wouldn't stand outside worrying what took him so long. He would retreat to the Holy of Holies, but he knew that when he emerged, he had a circle of people who were waiting to hold him. Being alone does not mean that we have to feel lonely. It's okay to pray alone. It's okay to sit with your own thoughts and your own feelings. It's okay sometimes even to grieve alone. Just so long as you realize that when you are ready to emerge, you have the people who surround you as a circle of love and of support, a safety net. Have you ever felt like you could disappear? Have you ever felt like you could fall and no one would hear? The Talmud tells us a story of Honi HaMa'agal. You probably know this one, Honi the circle maker. He's a person whose stories come to teach us how to live in the world, and his most famous is on Tu B'Shvat, because he had the forethought to plant trees even though he would not see them grow in the future, but that future generations would be able to enjoy them. Honi also prayed for rain. It happened once that his community was suffering a drought, and they asked Honi to pray for rain on their behalf. He prayed, but no rain came. Losing his patience, waiting for God to bring the rain, he decided to take matters into his own hands, and he drew a circle. He stood inside of that circle, and he said to God, "Master of the universe, your children turn to me to ask for your help. I swear by your great name that I am not budging from here until you have compassion on your children." Soon, a small rain began to drizzle. Honi yelled to God, "That's not what I was asking for. I asked for rains to fill the trenches and the reservoirs." And then it started to pour. Honi said, "That's not what I asked for either. I asked for rains of goodwill. I asked for rains of blessing and generosity." And then the right rains began to fall. But it rained, and it rained, and the rains didn't stop. They flooded the whole town, so much so that they had to leave the town of Jerusalem. Honi stood in a circle of his own making, by himself. He was railing. Honi thought the answer was to isolate himself. He acted alone, but what Honi missed, that the Kohen Gadol understood, is that even when we are in different places, even when we are isolated from one another, be it through distance or death or even a pandemic, we are not completely alone. We don't have to stand in circles by ourselves in order to be seen and in order to be heard. As is often the case, I find great wisdom in some of Riva's children's books. The circles all around us. We begin by drawing a circle on the ground along each shoe. A safe little place for just one person. Nobody in this circle but you. You could keep that circle closed off to everyone but yourself, but that would be like a library with just one book on the shelf. So let's draw a bigger circle for you and your family to share. Now you see what can happen in a circle full of care. It becomes a happier circle as more loved ones come to stay, and wouldn't it be even better if all of your friends could come and play? So you stretch and draw your circle even bigger than it's been, and let a few more people know they're welcome to come in. In the circles all around us, everywhere that we go, there's a difference we can make and a love we can all show. Today, in a moment, we will gather for Yisker. Maybe you've come alone. Maybe you've come with someone by your side. We each carry our own pain, we each carry our own loss. We each realize that our circles seem to have gotten smaller this year by the restrictions of the pandemic, and certainly by the physical loss of those who we loved and are now here grieving for. And still, in this moment of potential isolation, I want to ask us all to be a bit more expansive. I want to invite you for a moment to close your eyes. As your eyes are closed and you hear the sounds of 14th Avenue, imagine that you've drawn a circle, just big enough for you to fit. You are alone. Now draw a slightly bigger circle around yours and invite one of your loved ones in who you are here to remember this morning. Remember what you loved about them. Remember what made you smile. Remember what made you cry. What do you want to tell them about your life now? What have they taught you since they departed this earth? What is the legacy that they left that you want to tell them you are the most proud of? Now draw a bigger circle, and maybe even a circle after that. Who is there with you now? Who are the people that stand with you, who transform your aloneness into unity, who hold you, whose presence in the circle makes it so that you don't feel alone? We each have our own circle. The Kohen Gadol in the Holy of Holies, the sunroom in the back of my home, and the constricting feeling of our circles has made loss and illness almost impossible to bear. But in many ways, those circles are important. They hold our stories, and they hold our pain. Each of us has a circle. And when you are ready, you will see and witness the many circles that are around us. Even when the dark comes crashing through, when you need a friend to carry you, when you're broken on the ground, you will be found. So let the sun come streaming in. You'll reach up and you'll rise again. Lift your head and look around. You will be found. You will be found. You will be found. Gemar Chatima Tova.